And the webinar will now begin.
Well, top of the afternoon. Bill Joubert here with Louisiana Small Business Development Center here at Southeastern University. LSBDC is a partnership program with SBA and Louisiana Economic Development. Our sponsors for these are, of course, SBA, St. Tammany Corporation, Hammond Chamber of Commerce, Louisiana Economic Development, and Southeastern. All this information is accurate as of today. Things are fluid. You should expect changes as new legislation is on the floor and probably coming this weekend. We receive training and regular updates from SBA as their partners, so hopefully we'll have the latest and greatest for you next week. If you have a question during the event, please use the Q&A button at the bottom, type your question in, and we'll deal with them at the end. Might want to hang around for that session at the end because you don't know what you don't know, and these questions can be very valuable in answering them. I've asked Bryon Garrety, a CPA with Garrety Associates, to guide us through the compliance and forgiveness of this program. I've known Bryon most of my career. He's a smart guy, a former IRS guy with many years of experience and a head for strategy. So Bryon, please take it away.
Thank you, Bill. We call this presentation Restarting American Small Business, Paycheck Protection Plan Compliance. And it's about all the things that we have to do while we've got the money from the PPP program to make sure that at the end, the appropriate amount is forgiven. Now, Bill mentioned legislation. Yesterday, while we were actually broadcasting on one of these webinars, the House voted and passed their version of the Paycheck Protection Program Flexibility Act of 2020. Okay, the Senate also voted on their version. Okay, those bills right now are in reconciling committee. All right, and they're going to work out the changes or some of the differences between the two houses and what they passed. And we would hope that maybe even this evening there is a bill on the president's desk for signature. What we know about that right now, as the latest and most up-to-date information, is that the 8-week program, the covered period for the PPP program, you're supposed to pay your employees over 8 weeks, is going to be extended in a tremendous number of cases. And one set of the bills on the House side says, hey, we'll extend it to 24 weeks. The Senate version says 16 weeks. I don't know where it'll settle. It could be 16, it could be 24, it could be 12. They're working on those things. Hopefully by this evening we will know, but we do know that there are changes. We know that there could be changes to the time period for which the PPP program is open. Right now, the PPP program has shut down. They have stopped making any new PPP loans because they knew Congress was enacting new legislation and they don't know which law they're supposed to follow. So they're better off saying, hey, these ones were grandfathered in under the old law. The new law will revise applications and forms as we need to. So that's where we stand as of right now. Pay attention this evening, this weekend, and certainly come Monday and Tuesday, because that's really when Washington will go back to work and start to get some guidance out to us on what all these things mean. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, our timeline as we look at the this COVID crisis that's come in. It's all happened very, very quickly. If we look back, and it seems like it could have been years, but because we're the ones living in it right now, but really it was December 31st when the Chinese authorities first reported they were treating dozens of cases of the virus, okay? It was 12 days later, January 11th, when China reported its first death. We take that to where we are today on May 29th, and you know, in that full 5 months, the world has kind of changed on us. That's a very short period of time for all the things that have happened. What we're going to talk about today, the Paycheck Protection Program and everything that was created under the CARES program was actually passed on March 27th. Next slide. Okay. In that bill, there were things that were very, very changing just to us in the United States. Though one of the things that we certainly saw was the pandemic unemployment coverage. So there's 20 to 30 million people drawing unemployment coverage right now with a stipend from the federal government of $600 a week. And that's one of the things in this bill. The final rules on the individual stimulus checks were in this bill, the Paycheck Protection Program, which we're going to go into some detail. And then there are numerous tax laws and changes that we're going to see probably when we do our 2020 tax returns. All in all, the total spending in this program is $2 trillion, largest program of its kind ever, maybe the largest program we'll ever see for quite some time. Next slide. Okay, this is a table that I've got at least 2 times in the outline. And if you get a copy of it, it's one of the ones that you're going to want to hold on to, as long as that 8-week program is valid. Now, if they change it to a 12-week program or something different, we'll have to update it. Essentially, under the program, the PPP program, we're supposed to pay our employees or ourselves if we're self-employed back over 8 weeks. It's essentially for 8 weeks worth of compensation. The maximum compensation under the program is $15,384 for any person over the 56 days or the 8 weeks. Okay, how they're going to adjust this table, I don't know. But when we get into some of the calculations for forgiveness, knowing what the weekly rate is, $1,923 with the biweekly rate for $3,846 becomes important. So it's good to kind of have this table handy. Next slide. Okay. Again, it's some of the same limitations here, just not as tableized. It's all based upon the idea that the maximum compensation per year that anyone can receive a benefit for under the PPP program is $100,000. If you take the $100,000 and you divide it by 52 weeks, you get the $1,923 a week. Next slide. Okay. In order to stay on the right track with the PPP program, it's always good to look back to what the intention of the law was. And that's whether or not they do it over 8 weeks or 12 weeks or 16 weeks. But the intention of the law is to pay employees, and the payments include health and retirement benefits that were already set up. Okay. Then with any of the additional money, we can pay rents, utilities, and maybe some interest on some outstanding obligations. The payroll, when they're talking about payroll, is just that. Wage payroll is defined by Social Security. So it's got to be the payroll that hits the W-2 and hits the Form 941. Okay. The calculations for the program are 2.5 times average monthly payroll, which is usually based upon 2.5 times your 2019 average monthly payroll if you're self-employed, because self-employed people can apply for this program too, just as themselves as individuals. It's 2.5 times their average monthly self-employment profit. Okay, and the forgiveness is based upon how you spent the money and how much money you spent. Next slide. Okay. We're surveying y'all as participants in this program. So if you would, the question and answer button is, I think, at the bottom of your screen. If you've received PPP funds, and I know we've got, maybe 30 to 40 participants right now, just send us a yes or a no, and we'll count it up and we'll know exactly how many people have received PPP funds. On that regard, SBA has stopped processing PPP applications because of that law change. So it may be another week or two before any new PPP applications can go in. Next slide. Okay. Remember that the PPP program is a loan, okay? And you're going to end up requesting the forgiveness. But if you've received your funds, you've signed a loan document, you have an obligation to repay unless and until you fill out this the next series of forms requesting the forgiveness. The program itself, the loan program, is part of the SBA 7A program. Okay, it's called the Paycheck Protection Program, PPP. It's part of the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program that the SBA offers under its 7A title. We call this one the Payroll Loan Program. We call the other one the Economic Loan Program. And the reason this one gets all the fanfare is because this is where the loan can turn into a grant. Just remember that the PPP program and the EIDL program, the Economic Loan Program, are sister programs, brother-sister programs. They fall under some of the same headings. They follow a lot of the same rules, and then one breaks off a little bit to be the one that turns into a grant. Next slide. Okay. Comparing if you have employees and you apply for the PPP program versus if you're self-employed. We're going to see that it's very, very similar. 2.5 times either monthly self-employed income or average monthly payroll, originally designed for up to 8 weeks of payroll or 8 weeks of self-employed profit. That's one of the things that could be changing. And any excess beyond those 8 weeks of payroll and those type of things can be spent on rent, utilities, and interest, okay? The max benefit per person is $15,385. If you're self-employed and you're only one person, you go, okay, I understand that. If you're an employee of a company, you have to understand that if you were to get W-2s from several different companies, or maybe you're the owner of 3 or 4 different companies, under the entire PPP program, your maximum compensation can only be $15,385 during the program. If they were to find that you drew more than that, there's going to be a problem. So yeah, you're supposed to curtail any draws from other companies and make sure it all balances within the program guidelines. Next slide. Okay, one of the biggest misunderstood concepts in the PPP program, and where we've seen a lot of errors, okay, is in understanding how to treat contract workers or independent contractors, okay? They mention it numerous times throughout the laws and the regulations that govern the PPP program. There really shouldn't be any unclarity about it now. Everything should be very, very crystal clear. If we go to the regulations, 13 Code of Federal Regulations, that's CFR, Part 120B, 3, and paragraph 2H and paragraph 2P, we'll see that they directly address it. Independent contractors have the ability to apply for PPP on their own. They're not employees, so the business that might be applying does not include those people in their calculations. It's not included in the calculations for the amount of PPP, and it's not included in the amount of the calculations for forgiveness of PPP. I think due to some of the wording of the law and some of the early information that came out, this was widely misinterpreted, but it's become very clear, and it's been very, very clear for several weeks, well over a month now, almost 2 months. So if we have an error in our application, we need to fix it. If we got money we weren't supposed to get because our calculations were wrong, we need to not spend that money and look at sending it back. It was improperly obtained. Next slide. Okay. For y'all too, another question right now. So our question number 2 to you is, do you know an independent contractor that should apply for the PPP program? If we look at the PPP program, phase 1 ran out of money on April 14th. Okay, it started on April 3rd. On April 14th, it was out of money. The SBA had to shut down the PPP program. There was lots of panic. Congress had to go back to work, and then they voted another $310 billion for the program. That came in, and that part of the program went into action on April 27th. The number of loans and the amount of the loans have all dropped dramatically. In fact, where we stand probably today is there's still probably close to $100 billion in the program that has not been applied for yet. So if you do know an independent contractor or a business, it would be fantastic if they got in touch with the Small Business Development Center. If they need to talk to a CPA, my contact information will be at the end, but they should be making an application. Next slide. All right, quick math as we go back and we're kind of looking at where we were coming through the application to where we are now. If you're an employer, the example that we like to use is that you look back at your 2019 W-2s and say, hey, my total payroll was $120,000. We can confirm that by looking at the Form 941s and even the Form 940. Total payroll was $120,000. We divided by 12 months, and we find out that our average monthly payroll was $10,000. Our multiplier for the Paycheck Protection Plan calculation is 2.5 times. That means our Paycheck Protection loan amount would be $25,000. Next slide. If we're self-employed, the calculation is similar. if we go to our 2019 Schedule C, line 31, if our profits were $60,000, for our example, we would divide it by 12 months. We'd find that average monthly profit was $5,000. Our paycheck protection multiplier, 2.5, and therefore our paycheck protection loan amount would have been $12,500. The math is similar. Next slide. Okay. Where they start to differ, and where this may change with Congress, but where they start to differ is if we look at the amount of forgiveness, okay? For forgiveness for the self-employed, we take that $60,000 worth of profit. We divide it by 52 weeks. We come up with $1,153 per week. We know that we have 8 weeks of self-employed profit or draws that the owner of that small business can take. That's $9,230. The original amount of the loan was $12,500. That left us $3,270 remaining. That amount is what could be spent on rent, utilities, and interest if you're self-employed. If you have employees, you can spend all of the money on employees if you need to. But if you're self-employed, you're capped on how much you can pull out. And if you were a very small business that worked from home, didn't have building rent, didn't have utilities that were separated for your business because it's all run out of your house, and didn't have any debt, you didn't have any interest, that $3,270 would be the part of the loan under the current calculations that would not be forgiven. The money would either have to be given back or it would be turned into a 24-month low interest loan. Low interest is 1% right now. Next slide. Okay. So as we look through last Friday's numbers as they were available for the SBA, in Louisiana, there were a little over almost 66,400 PPP loan applications filed. That generated right at $7.2 billion for businesses in the state of Louisiana. So based on our population size and those type of things, Louisiana definitely got its fair share of these funds. And there at the bottom, you see approximately $100 billion in those funds are still available. By Monday, the SBA will have the new sites, the new statistics out. They're available at treasury.gov if anybody is interested in seeing them. Next slide. Okay, so if we have our loan already and we're starting to spend it, what are the things we need to be aware of? Well, first of all, we've got to understand that it had to be correct on the front end. If you remember that application, it was 2 pages, okay? It seemed very simple, but there were a number of places where you had to initial, there were boxes you had to check yes, no, and even on some of those yes, no boxes, there were 2 places where you had to initial again, and then you had to sign it at the end. Okay, and in the calculation on the top had to start off with the right number to end up with the right number. So we have to realize that a loan that was made with a material error or a misrepresentation cannot be forgiven. Okay, essentially, if it was breaking the law and the structure of the program at its beginning, it's going to fail all the way through. So if we have an error and we don't get out in front of it and try to fix it, we jeopardize every single bit of the loan not being forgiven and having to come back to and coming back on us. Okay. The 2.5 times most people got that right because it's sitting on the form, and then we got all those other rules and guidelines. Okay. The rules and guidelines we're going to go into. Some of them are relatively easy. Some of them are a bit involved. But one of the things I've told my clients, at least under the guidelines as they exist right now under the 8-week program, is that when you read some of the congressional testimony that was going on and look at the debate Congress was having, Congress was never saying, hey, we want 100% of this loan to be forgiven. There were discussions about 75, 85, 90% of the loan forgiven. But there really wasn't any discussions why they're putting this thing together about, oh yeah, we're going to give them all this money and none of it's going to get repaid. So I think you might have to adjust expectations sometimes and say, all right, maybe if only 90% of my loan's forgiven, that's okay. 90% in most colleges is still an A. Next slide. Okay. This is just rehashing some legislation and some rules that have recently come out. Okay, this one came out with the first part of the forgiveness application. The SBA was very direct, so it printed guidance again and said if the SBA determines in the course of its review that the borrower was ineligible for the PPP loan, okay, based upon the provisions of the CARE Act, the rules or guidance available at the time, and a lack of adequate basis to actually make the application, the loan will not be eligible for forgiveness. So I have some clients, or a client that proceeded with his PPP loan on his own. He did use 1099 amounts in his application. He sat down with me later on. He said, and we came up with a way to correct it. We contacted the bank that he used. We resubmitted an application and said, hey, these are the correct numbers. The bank adjusted the figures, took back the money that he wasn't supposed to get, and left him with the proper amount of money. So we did that on our own because we don't want to get in any trouble. Next slide. Okay. As we kind of go in and we're going to look for the certifications and all those things that go in, we go back to that original application and we say, hey, how does this work? We know it's 2.5 times the correct amount. We know it's based upon payroll. We should remember some of the certifications. We actually have to be a small business. We can't have more than 500 employees. And then the money is going to be used for the payroll, the health insurance, the retirement contributions, the utilities, the rent, and those type of things. Next slide. Okay. This is just a representation of the slide of all those things that you had to initial on your original application. The third one on this slide is important, and we're going to talk about this for a bit. Current economic uncertainty makes this loan request necessary to support the ongoing operations of the applicant. Okay? Basically, you've got to be able to demonstrate that your business needed the money. Okay? There were a lot of businesses, if you go back to that first round of the PPP that started on April 3rd, one of the reasons it ran out of money, there were some huge companies that applied and got the maximum amount, $10 million. Okay? It drained the funds very, very quickly. And smaller businesses like yours and mine weren't able to get the funds until Congress voted more money. A lot of those bigger companies kind of got caught with their hand in the cookie jar and had to give the money back. We saw some of them on TV. Steak Shack was one of them. And they were probably improperly applying. And they had other resources, and they may not have needed the money because their restaurants were still open and just serving drive-through and pickup services. Other businesses like local restaurants just had to close their doors. They've got no business. Or barber shops, hairdressers. Hey, you can't see any clients. They definitely needed the money. If you're uncertain, okay, if you say, hey, things haven't been that bad, my business has done okay, it's time to sit down with your CPA and probably your banker and talk about that one. Let's go to the next slide. Okay. It was important enough to the SBA that they issued a safe harbor rule. It basically said, hey, if you just give the money back by May 18th, no questions, no harm, no foul, nothing will happen to you. Okay. They have not extended that safe harbor yet. I haven't seen any proposal to do so in any of the legislation that's up. But like with my client, we went to the bank and just said, we don't even want to touch any of the money that was involved in a bad calculation. We want you to segregate that for us. And the bank was willing to cooperate and called the SBA, and the SBA said, hey, just do a new loan document and basically nullify the old amount and reissue the correct amount. And that worked for them. So if you haven't been materially or adversely affected by the COVID-19 virus, you've got to reconsider those funds. When I originally put this slide together, it was before May 18th, but I think you still need to reconsider. Next slide. In that reconsideration, and for all clients, whether you your business was closed and it's just self-evident that you needed to apply for the PPP loan, or you're a business who might be going, hey, I do have a question or two. I think you have to document your state of mind that was going on at the time you made the application. So you got to go back to early April and say, hey, what was going on? What was I seeing? I think it's necessary to write it down, to write a memo to the file and say, we were at a business, we had suffered, 4 days without a customer walking in, without the phone call ringing, with no deposits to the bank account. We had 10 people on staff. We were burning $20,000 of payroll a week, all those type of things, and document that state of mind. The other thing I can tell you is for this, it's best to get it written down because your memory is going to fail you. When they come back and start asking you these questions in July, August, or September, you're not going to remember. So it's better to have it written down and nicely concise. The other thing is you're going to need your financial statements, okay? You're going to need your December 31st financial statements, your March 31st financial statements, and then certainly April, May, June, and as long as the government has this program, you're probably going to need a monthly financial statement so that you can illustrate the actual impact that it had on your business, okay? And I think you're going to need to take your CPA and your banker to lunch. Because you're going to want their input too. The CPA can sit down with you and tell you what your financial ratios are, can talk to you about, yeah, I agree. It was absolutely time to apply for the money. We saw, the average daily deposit rate on your business fall by X percentage. We saw, your that you were borrowing on your line of credit. The CPA can tell you that. The banker can give you more details about, what your average carrying balance per day was at the bank and how it was dropping. All those things are important facts that just make it very, very easy for you to say, hey, I did the right thing. I applied for the loan. Or sitting down with the CPA might be, your business has done very well under this. Maybe you were running a cleaning company that got some major contracts to disinfect schools and hospitals and things like that. And if you had the money, maybe it is time just to give it back and avoid any problems. Next slide. So when we start talking about forgiveness, the options are no forgiveness, partial forgiveness, or entirely forgiven. I've already kind of given you the warning. Entirely forgiven may not have been Congress's original intent. With some of this new legislation, maybe it is. So if we start to talk about, 75% forgiven, 80% forgiven, 90% forgiven, that might be okay. Okay. When we start to talk about maybe some of the new rules in a week or two, maybe it will be just about everybody's 100% forgiven. Okay. The forgiveness is not automatic. You have to fill out the form and you have to request it. If you don't fill it out and you don't request it, they're very clear. They're not going to give it to you. Okay. So it takes action on your part. Okay. Not only is there action, the form is a bit complex. There's a lot of instructions. There's a lot of calculations, and there's a lot of documentation that you're going to have to provide. They've already stated as part of the law, every loan over $2 million will be audited, and as they say, many others. Okay, so if they see anything that looks different, off, if it doesn't tie to a payroll amount that they get from Social Security or they get from the IRS, if something doesn't match with something that the Treasury already has in its record, those are the ones they're going to come look at, So I wouldn't be sitting there thinking that I could get away with it. They have a lot of this information. All they need to do is turn on the computers and spend the time to match it up. The ones that don't match up are going to be the ones that go under scrutiny. All right. In figuring out what percentage of our loan is forgiven or if it's entirely forgiven, there's 4 major tests, okay? The first test I think everybody's pretty much aware of. 75% of the money has to be spent on payroll. 25% is allowed to be spent on other items, okay? Originally over an 8-week period. We'll see if that changes, okay? Now, what's interesting about that is the overall guiding rule of the program. It's also the last test that's on the application. It's the last calculation that we have to make. Okay, the next test. This is one that can be tricky. Reduction in salary not over 25% per person. That means this is a person-by-person test. You look at before the PPP loan and before the virus affected the business, how many people you had on payroll and what they were making and what you were paying them, and you look at the same thing afterwards and say, hey, nobody's salary or take-home pay should have dropped by more than 25%. So if you've got 2 people, it's a really short spreadsheet. And if you've got 200, it's a really long spreadsheet. But it's one that you're going to have to show your work on and turn in with your application for forgiveness. Test 3, full-time equivalent positions. So this is full-time employees or the equivalent of, sometimes if 40 hours is the test that they use in the program. So one person working 40 hours or more counts as 1. If there's 2 people and they're both working 20 hours together, that's 40 and they count as 1. Okay. This is where the biggest reduction comes in the ability to have a large percentage of your loan forgiven. If you started out with 10 employees and you're at 8 employees, you're going to lose at least 20% of your loan forgiveness based upon this calculation. We'll see that demonstrated in another slide or two. And again, one of the overall rules of the program, test 4, were the funds used for authorized purposes. This is definitely not a program where you can say, hey, I got my money, I'm closing the business doors and I'm going to Hawaii for a couple weeks. If they find that they did that, not only are you going to have to pay it back, I think you're going to have to pay it back with consequences. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, so test 1. 75% of loan proceeds must be used for payroll costs during the covered period. That might be covered period 12 weeks by the time we get to Tuesday, okay? The amount of the PPP loan forgiveness will be reduced to the extent the loan proceeds are used for qualified non-payroll cost in excess of 25%. So that 25%, 75% ratio is important, and it has to be applied a couple different times. One, at the very beginning. Hey, I got $100,000. I spent $75,000 or more on payroll. I spent $25,000 on rent, utilities, and interest. That's okay. Okay. If we spent more than that on rent and interest, that's going to be ineligible. If we didn't meet the 75%, the portion by which we don't meet the 75% is going to be ineligible, and that affects the other 25% because it makes a portion of that ineligible. So that program is a little bit fluid. Again, this is the last calculation on the form 3508, the forgiveness application. It's line 10, page 3. And so they apply it once at the end after you've figured out all your numbers. Next slide. Okay. Reduction in salary for each employee. The next test. This is one of the schedules to the 3508, and to the schedules, it's one of the tabled calculations. So as we get into the form, you'll see how that lays out. There's 11 pages there, one schedule, Schedule A, and 2 tables to Schedule A that need to be completed. And these go back on those 2 tables. The test, again, is just seeing by person, has anybody's salary or payroll been cut, and whether or not it's been restored. We've gotten some further guidance on this one as they've completed the form, and we've got some worksheets, some Excel worksheets that we can use to help us fill it out. Y'all are going to need to request payroll reports. These are going to have to come from your payroll company, from your QuickBooks file, from your internal bookkeeper or your payroll clerk, because there are comparative periods that have to be run here. They have to be run person by person. And then again, if it's 2 people, it'll be easy to eyeball it and see it. But if you're 200, you're definitely going to have to run a kind of detailed Excel program here to get to your final numbers. Next slide. There we go. All right, and then the calculation for full-time employees. I call it the big haircut. This one is very powerful, okay? If you're a small company and you lose 1 employee, you're going to have trouble getting your 100% of your loan forgiven, okay? We'll see a slide. We'll see the impact of these numbers and how it works out. There are also other things we have to learn. There's new words that have been created. Reference period, we get to compare the time period, the covered period that we spent our PPP. When you get a copy of the application, if you haven't gotten one prior to this seminar, get one, tomorrow morning, get a cup of coffee and spend, 10, 15 minutes reading through it and double underlining and trying to understand its flow. It's not too overly complicated, especially with some guidance, but it's not an application you sit down and you think you're going to finish in an hour. Okay, if you've got even 3 or 4 or 5 employees, this is going to be a little bit involved. You'll be involved on the application and completing the tables for probably several hours. Okay. The reference periods that we return to, we get our choice of two. We can take the time period from February 15th, 2019 through 6/30/2019, or the time period from January 1st, 2020 to February 29th, 2020. We have to run both calculations because we get to use the one that suits us the best. I've done my initial calculations. I know in my time period from 2019, I had 26 FTEs. And I know in my time period using the 2020 numbers, I had 24. That's my denominator. I'm always going to use the lowest number in my denominator because it benefits me the most. And also understand for this program, they've defined what FTE means. It means 40 hours per week. In other IRS legislation and American Care Act and Obamacare stuff, it was reduced to 30 hours. But in this one, they've stuck to a 40-hour test. So it is a bit of a higher threshold. Next slide. Okay. I told you we would see this one again. This is the maximum amount under the current tables that anybody can get by day, by week, bi-weekly, bi-monthly, monthly. And you'll see there the difference between month one and month two because the amount is $15,384, and because we originally thought month one was going to be May with 5 weeks in it, and month two would be June with 4 weeks in it, they would be different. So this may be updating a little bit based upon the number of days. Next slide. Okay. Here's the calculation for doing that full-time equivalent, the number of full-time employees that you have, okay? If you look at this slide very quickly, our example is, hey, the business received $100,000 in PPP funds. They had 10 full-time people working for them in the pre-PPP period, okay, in one of those testing periods. And now in the covered period, while they're spending the PPP funds, they have 8. And so of a loan that was $100,000, by losing 2 employees, they've lost 20% of their loan potential for forgiveness. Only $80,000 right now would be the potential for loan forgiveness if they didn't affect that number. Now, what does that mean? Well, I think these are some of the things we have to start calculating right now to see how bad off we are, because there are some things that we have the power over to correct. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay. One of the things that we get to do is that as long as we have the number of FTEs restored by June 30th under current legislation, we're okay. So we have kind of that cover all card. Hey, I was running 8, I was running 8, I was running 8. The last week of June, I finally found 2 people. I got them hired. They were on my payroll by June 30th. I'm good. Okay. That's a simple fix. There's also, when we get into the form, a table 2 calculation that helps us out. And that one is complicated in the fact that it says this. Hey, if you're an owner of the company, you're excluded. That's the easy part. But if any of your people, based upon the payroll cycle that you're on, and the amount they receive during that payroll cycle would have calculated out beyond the maximum threshold of calculation, those tables I was showing you, okay? So if you're on a weekly payroll, $1,923 a week. If they got more than that, they're also excluded for the 2019 year. So anybody during 2019, if they earn more than $1,923 during any week, you get to exclude them, which means they can come out of your denominator, and that makes your calculation a lot more favorable for you. So what does that mean? Hey, you got somebody who works for you, and they normally make $1,200 a week, okay? Rocking along, everything's good, and you go, well, they're never going to exceed that $1,923. But 1 week in 2019, you paid a $1,000 bonus. That week, they actually made $2,200, okay? Just 1 week, one time. We get to exclude them from the calculation, and that can help your numbers and raise your percentage of loan forgiveness. So keep that in mind. It is one of the more difficult calculations in the application. It's also one of the ones that you have to have a lot of documentation to support. Next slide. Okay. All right. So when we were looking at those tables before, If you could think about it right now, answer the question for me. If you're just thinking about to 2019, did any of your employees, who were on, say, a biweekly payroll exceed that biweekly threshold of $3,846? Typically, it happens with a bonus. So if somebody got a $5,000 bonus one week, they certainly exceeded it. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay. All right, the overall guiding test of any program, whether it's PPP or anything else, if you misuse the funds, you're in trouble. Don't misuse the funds. Don't knowingly misuse the funds. And if there's something going on, try to correct it as fast as you can. Next slide. Okay. At the Treasury website, they have these fantastic frequently asked questions. I don't have the number on the top one, but the second one on the page is as FAQ number 40. Okay, will a borrower suffer a reduction in forgiveness for amounts if an employee is laid off, if the borrower otherwise rehires that employee for the same salary, wage, same number of hours, uh, and the employee declines? So what happens to that business where all the workers are out there, doing pretty well on unemployment, and they say, I'd rather not come back to work right now? Does it punish your business? The answer is no. There's a letter that you can send to your employees, which is your offer to rehire them. I suggest you send that letter out certified. You email it to them, you text it to them, you try to get a response from them, but at least if you send it out certified, you've got proof that you sent it to them, and you get to exclude them from your calculations so they can come out of your denominator again. But issuing that letter and showing that you issued that letter is going to be critically important. Next slide. Okay. Just another example of the FAQs that are out there. This one really had to do more with the time periods. It does come into our reference periods when we come in. Let's go to the next slide. Okay. Question that has been asked several times. Hey, I'm doing all these things. What amounts qualify for forgiveness? It's gross payroll, it's the rent, it's the utilities, it's the interest. And they go, well, what about payroll taxes? And I go, payroll taxes really don't count in. They are, we're going off of a gross payroll number when we determine the amount of the loan, and Congress said we're going to go off of gross payroll when we determine the amount of forgiveness. The only other expense that gets in there are like state unemployment taxes, which we should know are usually a very, very small amount. Next slide. Just another FAQ, number 15. So it was early on, another place where they published don't put independent contractors into the calculations because they won't be forgiven. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay. The forgiveness application itself. I was hoping that everybody had a 3508 that you can refer to. We're going to pull it up on the screen and go through. These are the things that I need you to know before we pull it up. It's 11 pages long. 6 of those pages are actually instructions. So there's more instructions to the form than there is form, okay? The loan forgiveness application is comprised of, the 2-page loan forgiveness application, then the supporting Schedule A and the supporting Table 1 and Table 2, where you do all of those calculations. Uncommon terms, things that you need to get used to. Covered period. That is the period from when you received your PPP funds until you spend your PPP funds. Currently, right now, we say it's 8 weeks. Maybe we'll find out shortly that it's been extended. And then our reference periods are that period in 2019 that we can pull data from, February 15th, 2019 to June 30th, 2019. And then our 2020 reference period is January 1st, 2020 to February 29th, 2020, okay? Realize that we've got to keep our eyes open for further updates. We need to start working on gathering our data. We need to send out those return to work letters now, okay, not later. And we can start on this application now, but we can't finish it until we spend all of our money, okay? And Congress is going to give us that. But we can certainly start to begin the process. And we're going to need our original PPP application. So if you did it online, maybe you printed it out, or maybe you're going to have to go back and kind of recompute one. Next slide. Okay, this kind of begins the loan forgiveness application. I've got it laid out here on the slides, but we're going to go ahead and pull up the form so you can see it. Okay. The first part of page 3, which is 2 pages of instructions and definitions. Then page 3, we get to start filling it out. Some of these things you know your business name, you probably know your federal ID number, your phone number, your email address. But do you know your SBA PPP loan number? It's probably in one of those emails you received from the bank, in the copy of the documents that you executed. Did your lender assign a loan number prior to the SBA taking it over? They probably did. Do you have that? You go, well, I don't know. I signed a bunch of different things. I didn't look at all of them. What was the PPP loan amount? Okay, that you probably know. It matches the deposit that hit the bank account. And what was the disbursement date? What date did it hit your bank account? Because that's a beginning date for us. That's one of those important dates. Okay. On the original PPP application for the loan, you listed number of employees. Okay. Not everybody knew what they meant at that time, and they didn't define it. Was the total number of W-2s during 2019? Was it the total number of employees during 2020? Here, they're being more specific about it. At the time of the loan application, so April 3rd until you completed the paperwork and turned it in, how many employees did you have? They're asking that for a particular reason, and we're not sure why yet. All right. So maybe you had layoffs and you were down to 1 employee. Then the answer is 1. Okay. Employees at the time of forgiveness of the application. So when we finally go to the forgiveness dates, okay, and we get down there, how many employees do we have back on staff? Hopefully more than 1. But that is one of the things that we'll have to figure out. So that blank right there, we may not know yet because we haven't completed the forgiveness application. That may be still a few weeks out. If you receive the EIDL advance amount, they need to know the amount, and they need to know the EIDL number. The advance amount was up to $10,000 based upon your number of employees, and your number was issued to you, on the computer at that point in time, and you printed out a page that was, essentially red, white, and blue. Payroll schedule: weekly, biweekly, twice a month, monthly, other. Covered period, which is going to be when you first received the money through the time period you spent it, or an alternative period if they elect it. And if you exceeded $2 million, you have to check that box and just know you're going to get audited. Okay. All the other things at least on this page, are going to be completed at the end of the period after we have all of our numbers. Let's go on to the next page. Okay. Here are some of the representations and certifications that you have to initial, okay? And the signature line is at the bottom. But one of the things that you're saying is that no individual received more than $15,385 during the period. And then we're going to sign off on the bottom of it. Next page. And look at this. This revision date or issue date was 5/20. If they revise the form, Monday or Tuesday, it's going to have a revision date of 6/20, and that's the one we're going to be using. More instructions for the Schedule A. And let's move on down the page, get to the schedule itself. And we're going to start entering cash compensation for our employees, average FTEs, and doing those calculations. And those supporting calculations are going to be back on Table 1 and Table 2. Let's go back into the next page of the form. They don't give us much of a table here, just some instructions. And let's go on a little further. And they kind of give you a model of what the table should look like. Your multipliers there. Reduction for safe harbor, we talked about that. Next page. That's if you're able to get them all back in time. And here's really our first table for Schedule A. Employee's name, the last 4 digits of their social security number, how much they made, how they weigh out as far as an FTE, and whether or not they qualified for any of the salary reduction. All of these stuff, which is a little complicated trying to do it on paper, we have in an Excel form or an Excel table that was put together by the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. If you can pull that up, please. So we'll try to go to the Excel form.
I apologize.
Show
Which
that
document are you looking for? Which document?
The Excel form, the Excel table. The Excel table itself, again, it's put together by the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. It's available for public distribution. If you go to AICPA.org, American Institute of Certified Public Accountants.org, you can download a copy under their COVID-19 response and tools page, little purple banner on the page if you get to it. The Excel table itself starts here. It's got instructions on it. Blue cells indicate input cells. Green cells indicate calculations, and the grayed out cells are, protected and contain some of the data there. We'll see if they can get the Excel table back up. Page 1 on the Excel table is not really where the work begins. The work begins about 5 tabs back, where we start to accumulate the data per employee. So you accumulate data for quarter 1 2020 for your covered period, and then for a reference, for your 2019 reference period here. So you do have to have payroll reports when you do this. You're going to have to be in close conversations with your payroll companies. I know some of the larger payroll companies are already putting together formatted reports to provide this to clients. And if you have a lot of employees and they want to charge you $25 for the report, I'm going to tell you it's worth it, because keying it in for hours and hours would not be any fun. So just like the form, you can't necessarily complete everything that's within the Excel tables here, but you can go ahead and list all the employees you had during quarter 1 2020, and you can get their payroll amounts. You can go back to your reference period for 2019, and you can list all those amounts. And so there can be a lot of homework here if you've got a complex organization, a lot of employees. Start getting ahead of it now so you can get the information into the forms. At the AICPA website, there are also some further written instructions for this form, and it can be a great tool to guide you through. Again, if you have 2 employees, don't worry about this form. You can pretty much look at it. It's going to be simple, especially if you had 2 and you have 2 afterwards and their salaries were the same and nothing dropped. But for the people that have 15 employees, 25 employees, 35 employees, or even if you have 5 employees, but with the virus, hours shifted, rates shifted, they were laid off for 2 weeks, they came back to work, they couldn't come back to work full time at first, now they're coming back to work. There's some data that you need to massage there, because, in order to get the forgiveness amounts you need, at least under the 8-week period, maybe they need to be working more hours in June, okay, so that the money gets used up and goes in the right ways to have the maximum amount forgiven. Okay. That let's go back to the PowerPoints. I think we got a couple more slides at the end we can click through. I've got some references that I want y'all to be aware of. And they really are, first realize that the Small Business Development Center, okay, is just a very, very powerful tool for you. They are funded with money from the SBA. Okay, so they operate on an SBA grant. They are in close contact with the SBA. They get the latest and greatest information, and because they're funded with an SBA grant, the resources that you get from them are free. Okay, it is hard to beat that. Okay, Karen, it's slide 44 if you need to get to it. Treasury.gov. Is another very, very powerful website. It's the Treasury's front page. It's got a red banner on it. It says, it talks about COVID-19 and all the rules that the Treasury Department has put on there. The forms are out there. The rules are out there. Those FAQs are out there. And anytime they're going to change anything, it hits that page first. So you don't have to listen to your brother-in-law. You don't have to listen to anybody else. You can go get the facts that you need. Also, SBA.gov. Okay, is a fantastic tool. That's where the latest forms are. That's where those things go down. At the end, you can go to GarretyCPA.com, my website. We have a small button on there for some references, mainly links to some of these other things. But you can leave us a question. You can email us. You can contact us. You can call us. We're going to try to get you an answer. And then again, that Small Business Development Center one, is just a key go-to place to get that information. That's my information. If you need to contact me, you can contact us on Facebook. If you need to email, please email sgarrety@garretycpa.com. That one's been set up specifically for your incoming questions about the PPP program. Remember, every government program requires forms. Just keep calm, fill out the next form, and carry on. I think with that, we can take a few minutes of questions, Karen. All right, I don't know if we're having an internet connection problem or not. I hope everybody can still hear me. The first question, I'm able to look at them too. Karen will normally read them out. If you can take over, please do, Karen. But when does the 8-week start date for counting payroll start? It starts the day you get the money, okay? There's a slight alteration to that. If you got your money in between pay periods, it can start at the date of the next pay period, which is no longer than 2 weeks away from the date you originally got the money. That start date probably isn't going to change in the legislation. It's the end date, whether or not it's still 8 weeks.
If you hire additional people after you applied and were granted the loan, is there a way to increase the amount of the loan?
No, there's not, because again, the period for getting the loan was usually based upon 2019 information. So it's not going to go up for something that you did in 2020.
I'm a small business sole proprietor. How can I change my loan to a small interest loan?
Okay. A small sole proprietor can get a PPP loan, and you can also apply for the SBA EIDL program, the brother program to this program. Right now, the application process for that is closed. It's going to reopen. When they reopen it, it's going to be posted on the SBA's website, but right now I know if you went and looked at it, it's going to say the application process is only open for agricultural businesses. So if you're a farmer, you can apply right now. We really are hoping that come June 1st, this coming Monday, they open it up for some additional classifications of businesses.
Can part-time employees be included in calculation?
Yes, part-time people are, but realize the way the hours work. You know, 2 people at 20 hours count as 1. 4 people at 10 hours count as 1, you know, so it really is at the point, if you got somebody who worked 38 hours, they're not 1 yet, you know, they're 80%. You know, you need somebody else who worked 2 hours that week to get to 1. So 40 hours is the true calculation.
What would you suggest for a sole proprietor or self-employed individual who had no employees prior to receiving PPP loan, but brought on employees after receiving it?
Okay. Your PPP amount would have been based upon your 2019 profit as the sole proprietorship. That is your PPP amount. There's no provision right now for what's happening in 2020. The look back period where they measured all this and made the loan was the 19 information. So I would say at that point, perhaps apply for EIDL when it opens up, and that will give you some additional working capital for the company.
On test 3 reference period, is that test run on the AI CPA spreadsheet, or do you make your own spreadsheet showing the calculation?
The AI CPA spreadsheet has all of the tests, okay? Now, do realize that the spreadsheet as it's issued right now, it was released yesterday, is based upon the 8-week calculation. If Congress changes that, which we know they're in the process of doing, that AI CPA spreadsheet will be updated. The table data that you build, you know, per employee and the amount they made for those type of things, just remember you can copy and paste that one into the new spreadsheet when they have it available.
What happens when you offer jobs back starting June 1st and employee says will not come back until July 1st?
Okay, that's where you need that offer to rehire letter. They have it at the SBDC, and if you contact them, they can get it to you. If you email me, I will get it to you. But I think it is critically important, if you're not able to return all of your staff, you've got to get those letters out and spend the $3.90 it takes to send it registered mail, you know, certified mail, so that you've got proof that it went out.
What should a business do who received the funds but did not bring the employee back, did not offer these employees their job, and these employees collected unemployment?
Okay, well, we're at that point that if you receive the funds and you can't spend it according to the program guidelines, the funds are going to have to go back. So you send your letters out to your employees and say, hey, time to come back to work. You know, we've got business and I need you back on. That at least protects you and shows you that you were following program guidelines and did everything you were supposed to. You know, but if you got $20,000 under PPP and you go back and start looking at it, if you can't get your employees back and you can't hire new ones, you didn't have payroll to spend it on. So it's going to have to go back. If you can only spend 10,000 of it on payroll, that'll be the part that needs to be forgiven and will be. The rest of the money will have to be, you know, either repaid at the end and say, hey, here it is back, or, you know, repaid over time.
If a self-employed person received both the EIDL loan and the PPP, and the PPP loan is deemed to be totally forgivable, does the received EIDL loan amount offset the PPP loan amount received for the forgiveness purposes?
Well, the EIDL is separate, so the amount of the EIDL is not forgiven. Okay, so it's not. And when we get to a sole proprietorship, the calculations for sole proprietorship versus a company with employees are different. So even in the forgiveness calculations, when you have to compare the two PPP and EIDL loans, they are different because the amount of PPP for the self-employed person is just that. It's a representation of self-employed profit. That is their pay, okay? The EIDL amount for a sole proprietorship doesn't take into account owner draw or owner pay. All it takes into account is a working overhead for the business, a working capital needs for the business.
Can you explain the EIDL advance? I'm not sure I'm clear on that.
Okay, the EIDL advance was just that. It was a very quick grab at some money. The SBA opens up. It opened up very early on, probably the end of March, and was open up till about April 14th. You would go in, you'd put in the gross receipts for the business, cost of goods sold, a few other key factors, your bank account number, and a few things like that. And based upon the number of employees that you had, they would send you an EIDL advance that just hit your bank account. Okay, you might get an email on it, but there wasn't much notification. That's the advance amount. Okay, because it is based upon the number of employees, and it was $1,000 per employee. When they're doing the PPP calculations, they want to know how much you got in EIDL advance. If you didn't get any, the answer is zero.
Should net profit from S Corp be included with an owner-employee W-2 for PPP calculations?
Only if you're paying self-employment tax under that S corporation profit, and only up to a maximum amount of $100,000. Now, we could probably look at 1 million different S corporations and not find somebody who elected to pay self-employment tax on it. So the quick answer is no.
Can a part-time employee's hours be increased to full-time hours to meet FTE requirements within the 8-week period?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, so you could increase one person who was working 20 to 40, or you could hire another person at 20.
Is Schedule E for partnership compensation acceptable for validation of compensation paid?
It's not. You have to have the partnership return if you're a partner, and partnerships have to apply at the entity level. There was confusion of that during the first couple weeks of the program, but the SBA did issue guidance on it. I don't remember which FAQ number it is, but it is in the FAQs, and some definite guidance on how the partnerships are supposed to make application.
Okay, we have no further questions at this time.
Okay. Everybody have a great weekend. You know, we are kind of hopefully seeing the end of this cycle of the pandemic. Hopefully the next phase of business opening by the time we get to next Friday will be upon us. So a little bit more freedom, a few more businesses open and things like that, a few more restaurants and stuff like that can come in. I hope that all of y'all are doing well, and please again know, we want to be a resource to you, so you can contact us directly. You can contact the Small Business Development Center, and both that treasury.gov and that sba.gov are a wealth of information.
Well, Bryon, we can't thank you enough for all the time you've committed to this. So folks, on the screen, there's an SBDC located near you. You can contact them there. Everyone who attended, you're going to receive slides and a survey, a little questionnaire just rating our service, how great the seminar was. please fill those out when you get them. And I can't thank Bryon Garrety enough, and our Small Business Administration, St. Tammany Corporation, Hammond Chamber of Commerce, LED, and of course Southeastern. Be on the lookout for more upcoming events. As the legislation is announced, we'll be doing more of these. So I bid you a good day.